Warning: the following program may contain material not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
They say for every light in this world, there is a shadow waiting to reclaim it. We've been told what to believe, what to fear, and exactly where the boundaries of real end. But tonight, we're crossing those lines. From the whispers in the attic to the lights in the desert sky and the entities that walk among us, we are stepping behind the veil. Transmitting from deep within the mountains of West Virginia, it's time to seek the truth. This is Let's Find Out with Diego. And now, here is your host, Diego the Podcaster.
On this episode of Let's Find Out, with decades of field experience, our guest is a definitive voice in regional paranormal studies. A native of eastern Pennsylvania, his work is deeply rooted in the history and folklore of the coal region. His acclaimed series, Strange Stories from the Skulking Stream, captures the unique supernatural landscape of the Northeast. His latest release, The Stream of Spirits, offers an in-depth exploration of the spirits and hauntings of eastern Pennsylvania, blending investigative data with gripping local narrative. All this plus more. Please welcome our good friend, author and researcher, Richard Bigg. Richard, my friend, welcome back to Let's Find Out.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Hey, it's good to see you again as well. And as we were talking earlier on the pre-interview, it's right about this time for the last couple of years now that I brought you on the show because you keep releasing these books. And now we're on book 3 with the Stream of Spirits. I'm looking forward to diving into this one because I read the book description. There's some stuff in it that's pretty wild, brother.
Yeah, there's some stuff that surprised me too, writing it.
Yeah, we're going to get into that in a few minutes. Of course, congratulations on your third book, by the way.
Thank you.
And as we talked the first time, I think we got into it a little bit, that you're a seasoned paranormal investigator as well. And I don't know, when's the last time you've gone out there and done something?
Last big investigation I did was in October. I did Pennhurst Asylum. That's, for people that aren't familiar, that was a real large asylum in eastern Pennsylvania. It was right along the Schuylkill River, which is the geographical center of my book series. So I had an opportunity to go out there. Some YouTubers were interested in having quote-unquote ghost hunters come out to help them do an investigation so that they could get some footage and things. So I went out with them. They paid for it, so obviously the price is right for me. And so that was probably the biggest investigation I've done in a while. That was pretty interesting. It was also real upsetting too, that if people are familiar with the history of Pennhurst, it was a state school for people with mental disabilities. And there are still spirits there. They're not happy. We had spirits asking us for help. And some interesting things happened during that investigation. I went there with the intent of helping spirits. I try to do that in my work. I try to look at things from the perspective of these spirits are going through something. In my third book, I cover what I call the trauma theory of hauntings. The idea that a haunting is a one-to-one match for PTSD phenomena. So if you look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual or the criteria for PTSD, it actually matches one-to-one with haunting phenomena, down to things like reliving past events. And we see that in a haunting where we call them residual hauntings, where things keep happening over and over again. That's also a PTSD criteria. And having outbursts and lashing out, violent tendencies, all these kind of things, they match up one-to-one between hauntings and PTSD. So I figure what place would people most be traumatized, and Penhurst is right at the top of the list for spirits that would have been traumatized all throughout their life. You're talking about kids that had very low IQs, didn't really know what was happening to them, and they were in terrible situations, terrible things happening. And that was borne out in the investigation. We had spirits that were asking us for help, saying that they wanted someone to help them. I did a prayer where I had a sigil, one of the pentagrams of Solomon, that was geared toward freeing spirits. So I used that with a prayer. It was one of the Psalms from the Bible, where it talks about God lifting you up from the muck and the mire, raising you up and freeing your spirit. So I started reading that while I was doing an EVP session, and I brought it up on my phone to read it. And I was familiar with the King James Version Bible, where it says lifting up out of the muck and the mire. When my phone came up, it read lifted me up from the mud and the mire. So I thought that was odd. That was the I think New International Version, or one of the common English versions. So I thought that was odd, and I read through it. Did my little seance thing by myself, while the other teams were in another building. And later on during the night, a team came over from the other building, and they said the weirdest thing happened. They kept talking about mud. They kept asking about mud. So the other team brought a container of mud into the building where they were, because the spirits just kept talking about mud when they were using their ghost hunting equipment. So I thought that was odd. They were talking about mud at this, and I did sync it up when I looked through the evidence. They were asking that at the same time that I was reading that psalm. So I thought that was interesting. And then we had some interesting EVPs, some spirits asking for help repeatedly. We prayed with them. After I read the Lord's Prayer, they said amen at the same time that I did. So I thought that was interesting, and I hope that I helped to bring some comfort to them.
It's very interesting what you just said. You're talking about the trauma, the PTSD, and the situations these children were in was the most awful stories I've ever heard.
Yeah, I've worked with people that lived there. I used to work in a business that worked with people with mental disabilities, and I worked with several people that used to live there, and I could tell you horror stories of just how they function after years and decades of not being there, and that they're still going through that trauma, and they still have, like, even before I went there, I wasn't sure that it might still be haunted, but I knew that the place haunted them, even if they're not haunting the place, because it's just so traumatic what they went through.
And you're right along where I'm getting at here, because this location, I'm going to assume, has had thousands and thousands of investigators come in and out.
Yeah.
And some are in it for the right reasons, some are in it for the wrong reasons. I'm assuming, and we all know what happens when we assume, but I'm going to be safe to bet that there's been some spirits that I would say have freed themselves and crossed over, or are no longer there. If I'm going to do a mathematical equation with the number of investigations that have been there and the number of souls or spirits that were or are still there, why are there so many still left? Why do you think, your opinion, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. Why are they choosing to still stay when they can actually perhaps get assistance with freeing themselves of this horrible location?
I think that goes back to what I said about the trauma theory. When you go through trauma, what people do is, I'm trying to think of the proper psychological phrase for it. I'm a psych major, and I'm kind of feeling bad that I'm not thinking this through, but in the paranormal community, we talk about spirits being bound to places or being stuck somewhere. I don't look at it as like they're physically locked where they are. I think of it more as it's a comfort to be somewhere familiar. When you have trauma, we teach people to ground themselves to common or familiar places or things. You can do this by yourself if you have trauma, if you're experiencing anxiety or something. You can touch a piece of fabric and focus on it, and that will ground you to that moment in time. You can read old diaries or look at old pictures and think about how you felt at that time, and that can help you to relieve some of that trauma or anxiety. And I think that spirits are doing that themselves. Uh, People do it automatically, but it is also a psychological technique that we teach people in psychology to do this on purpose, to focus less on the traumatic things. They'll ground themselves by focusing on familiar things, familiar textures, familiar people. So I think that that's more what's going on in paranormal cases, where you have hauntings of people that may not have even been at the location in life, but they've grounded themselves to a location after death, and they find comfort in it. And then I think that is probably why you see so many hauntings get worse when people do renovations and redecorating their houses or buildings, things like that. And then that brings up the spirits more because they're being prevented from that grounding experience. That's my opinion anyway. And my opinion's based on speaking with spirits. So I've got a little bit to go with it, but yeah, that's my theory.
No, that's perfectly well said. And I think also we talk about renovations because basically they're changing an area that they may not want to be changed. They like it the way it is.
Exactly.
So you're basically disturbing their home. And I think that's probably kind of really angers them. And some of them maybe not always angry, but you kind of rattled them.
Upset, and you're stirring up the trauma again because you're taking what it was that they were using to comfort themselves.
And now, well, now that we're going to bring it up, some stories in your new book with the stream of spirits. You cover a wide range of phenomenon. You have roadside specters and to the mysterious disappearances. Out of all those stories, because we're now a year removed from the second book, correct? Just about a year removed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you've probably researched hundreds of places, hundreds of stories. In this book, is there a specific story or location from this volume that kind of shook you up a little bit or rattled you the most, even after being decades in the profession of being a paranormal investigator?
I've said it before, the Tumbling Run Valley, also called the Stony Valley, farther south. It's a long straight valley that runs from, I think, Dauphin to Jim Thorpe. Just a long straight valley. It's like the second ridge in the Ridge and Valley section of Pennsylvania. There are so few people living there, and yet there's so many hauntings, weird phenomena, strange animals, disappearances. A missing person was just his remains were just found there last year. It's just got such a history of people going missing, disappearances, strange animals, giant snakes, the Tumbling Run hex cat that I think we talked about before. In its earliest history, which I talk about in the third book, it was known as Teufel's Loch, which is German for the Devil's Hole, because one of the earliest settlers there was traveling across the valley and got lost for 3 days. And when he finally returned, he said that he was stuck in the Devil's Hole for 3 days. And all throughout history, people have disappeared there. It's been a huge number of suicides, people drowning themselves, or just going for a swim and then they just disappear under the water, no bubbles, no ripples. They're just gone. And that happened again and again and again all throughout history. Down further south in the Stony Valley, I have chapters in the book on spirits down that way. A headless ghost. Headless ghosts are another big thing that came up in this book. So you talk about stories that surprised me. I think one of the strangest that I've dealt with is one of the headless spirits in Auburn, Pennsylvania. So this isn't in the Tumbling Run Valley. It's a few miles south of there. Auburn is a small town. It's just across the highway from where I live. So I have a bunch of stories in the book of headless ghosts. There are several just in Schuylkill County alone. But this one in particular was really strange because there was a gentleman, he grew up between the 20s and 40s in Auburn. And I didn't have a chance to interview him, but I spoke with an investigator who did talk with him. He lived in a small shack when he was growing up in Auburn. He was about 1,000 feet south of the train depot there. And he said that his family would see a headless ghost walking along the tracks. He said that definitely wasn't somebody in an outfit. It wasn't a suit. There was nowhere for his head to even be. It was obviously a headless person. So looking into it, I looked for people that might have lost their head nearby. So the strangest history of this area, you have December of 1882, a man named Frank Hain lived near Auburn. He was working at the Philadelphia and Reading Rail Depot in Reading. He was locking rail cars together, the clasping machinery that holds the cars together. He was working on that, and a car farther down the line ran into the line that he was working on, pushed him off, cut off his head and his arm. So he was from Auburn, working in Reading when this happened. 5 months later, after this man, remember his name was Frank Hain, 5 months later in May of 1883, a man named George Hain was employed at the Reading and Columbia Railroad. He was on the tracks and his train went off the road and he was crushed. He was covered by the boiler. So the boiler covered everything except his head and his arm. And he died about an hour later. So you have Frank Hain, then George Hain. In George Hain's obituary, they list his relative Frank Hain, who survived him. This Frank Hain was actually a colonel who was the vice president and general manager of the New York Elevated Railroad. He was also the guy that dug the tunnels. He developed the subway basically for New York. So you have another Frank Hain. And this guy in May of 1896, so we're talking 13 years later, the brother of the last George Hain, he was in a sanitarium. He was having some neurological issues. He was in a sanitarium, and one day he walked out to some nearby railroad tracks, laid down on the tracks, and a car from farther down the line from where he was bumped another car, rolled that one over top of him, cut off his head and arm, just like the first Frank Hain. So then he was buried in Danville, Montour County. So his family was from Reading. So this George Hain and the second Frank Hain were from Reading. First one was from Auburn, working in Reading. Then another man named George Hain, he was at the Auburn train station in October of 1903. So this is 21 years after the first Frank Hain. This man's name was George Hain again. And he came into Auburn on the train. he was acting weird. He was asking people when the next train would be by. Nobody could tell him for sure. So he went back to the train station. Meanwhile, the number 8 train was coming into town, and the conductor looked out and saw this man step onto the railroad tracks, kneel down, put his head over the railroad tracks. And he said that as he was passing over the man, he looked up at him with a horrible expression on his face. He said it was a terrible look, like a mad grin on his face. He said he'll never forget the look on this man's face. So over the course of 21 years, you had Frank Hain, George Hain, Frank Hain, George Hain, all between Auburn and Reading, all being decapitated with their arm and head being cut off, all along the same stretches of tracks, or at least crossing those same tracks to be buried. All these guys with the same couple of names, all having the same kind of thing happen to them. And then you see Headless Ghost. Now, the guy, Gary, who had first reported this Headless Ghost in Auburn, also had a story when he was growing up around the 40s, where he had a friend that was visiting him, and his friend got a terrible look on his face, looked out the window. Gary looked at where he was looking, and he said that they saw a monstrous face looking in the window at them. Now, if you're a Sasquatch investigator, this might be like one of those things, like maybe Sasquatch is looking in your window, but I'm thinking of this final George Hain and the quote-unquote terrible look that he gave the conductor as he was run over, and the fact that this happened a couple hundred feet from where this house was. So I thought that was an interesting story, because you have not just a ghost, you have a couple different types of ghosts, and just this weird repeating pattern of history.
I'm starting to think there's something with this family line. And I know you've done plenty of research, and the first thing that comes to mind, for me at least, is there some sort of generational curse with this family? Do you know?
Only the two of them were related. The two in the middle, the first George and the second Frank, they were brothers. I couldn't find any relation with any of the other guys. So it's like it's just the name, and it's just George Hain, just Frank Hain.
You couldn't find 4 I want to say an awful joke, but 4 people who won the most unluckiest lottery of all with the same last name. I've never heard of such a thing before. That's very interesting. And because I'm thinking headless people, and you're thinking about, I mean, we didn't talk about there's no beheadings in the area, but everything's the same. We're talking trains here.
Yeah. And in India, there is a type of ghost in their folklore. There's a type of ghost that's a headless ghost that is linked with trains. Like that's a theme in this Indian lore. There's this type of ghost that was decapitated by a train, and that they return to look for their heads. And you see that same connection with trains here in Pennsylvania, where a lot of the headless ghosts. There's another headless ghost in Molino, about 2 miles south of me, where a gentleman was, when they first brought trains to the U.S., he was looking at the train. He was on his horseback. He and the horse were decapitated. So that was, I'd say, about 3 miles south of Auburn, where this other one happened. So there's this weird connection with trains and headless ghosts for some reason. And another one down in the Stony Valley, which was the same strange valley that I mentioned. Another story from the book happened there, where a gentleman laid down on the railroad tracks for no apparent reason. He was run over, and now people see a headless ghost there.
Interesting. Now, in today's time, and I know that things happen with trains now, I think, aside from crime, where there's been reports of people pushing people into the train tracks, or suicides perhaps, but in this type of thing where it seems to be purely accidental, has there been any current stories about people dying this way, or trains in your area?
Thankfully, I'm not familiar with any. I don't think that it's happened lately. That these were in the late 1800s. The one with the headless horse rider, that was when the trains first came here. So it was when people were less familiar with the danger of trains, and they were just trying to be a looky-loo and see what it was about. These guys were mostly accidents. You could make an argument that maybe the second Frank might have been a suicide, and the second George might have been a suicide. Or the second George definitely was a suicide. He left a note. So he definitely did that on purpose. But the other two were just train accidents. Thankfully, like you said, it hasn't happened lately. Knock
That's
on wood.
good. Yeah, this be a warning. Any listener out there, a friend of ours that have a last name of Haynes, maybe
Yeah, stay off the
you want to stay off the trains, man, because it's not worth it. Go ahead and fly or drive yourself. But all joking aside, that's an amazing story, which is what you bring to the table in this book series. And you spent a large portion of your life, you documented the shadows of Eastern Pennsylvania. When for someone who grew up close to your area or around the area, what is the one hidden haunted landmark that they likely pass by every day without even noticing and don't know anything about it?
Probably the Red Church in Orgsburg. People pass that every day. The church itself doesn't have any real hauntings necessarily. I went to church there when I was younger. It's got a little bit of a spooky vibe sometimes, but across the road from it is the cemetery. And I'd say a good third of my last book took place right around the say a quarter mile of that, because all around the Red Church there were tales of one guy that was killed by an axe murderer, and then his ghost would come back and scream from his grave. His grave would go uncovered until the guy that killed him actually committed suicide. Another case was a gentleman that was the teacher at a small one-room schoolhouse that was located about 100 yards north of the Red Church, and he had a demon dog, a small black dog that only he could see or hear, and the dog would tell him to kill himself, and eventually he did kill himself. Another case would be there were just several cases of witchcraft. There was a woman that was escaping like a white witch cat that had jumped on the back of her horse, and she knew that if she could escape to the Red Church, that she would be safe. So when she reached the Red Church, it was kind of like an Ichabod Crane type of story where it's like the chase of the demon coming after you. So she had this witch cat that was jumping on the back of her horse, and once she got to the Red Church, she was free and safe.
Wow, there's Pennsylvania gives so much, and this is just Pennsylvania. We still have plenty of other states here in the United States where a lot of weird stuff happens. Some states are more known for paranormal. A lot more states are known for UFO or cryptids. Pennsylvania kind of has a flavor of all three.
Yeah.
Same thing here in West Virginia. We have
Oh yeah.
our fingerprints on a lot of these things. And with the stories and the research that you've conducted, now you have the third book. Are you physically going to some of these locations?
Yeah, a lot of the stuff that I write about, or especially in the third book, are places that I've been. I go to the places when I'm writing about them just to see the place, see what it's like, get the vibes from the place. Especially with the third book being on spirits and ghosts, and me being the paranormal investigator, I put in some of the investigations that I did, some of the hauntings that I've dealt with, or just weird cases that me or my friends have dealt with. So some of the roadside hauntings were just legend trips that my friends and I had dealt with. So where you go out looking for ghosts and you just find crazy stuff happens.
And now You didn't beat me to the punch, but right along the lines of thought what I was having. Because you're going to these locations, you're writing about them.
Mhm.
And I know you've been a paranormal investigator for a long time, and there are certain risks and rewards when it comes to that kind of field of work. When you started writing about these stories, did anything change for you? Anything about you change?
I think that I became more aware of. I bring this up every time we talk. I just became more aware of the connection between all these different phenomena. You think of Bigfoot, UFO, witchcraft, ghosts, but the more I research it, the more I see it's all interconnected. There's stories of Bigfoot where that are thematically similar to legends of ghosts and people that are interacting with the spirit world, where legends of Bigfoot are sometimes also identified as coming out of UFOs or dealing with UFOs or having some kind of weird technology with them. You have, like, I always use the example of uh, the werewolf's grave in the first book. So that's the ghost of a werewolf who ostensibly was a witch or something along that matter, where he was purposely turning himself into a wolf. So there you have all three. You have the cryptozoological, you have a wolf man, he's a witch, and then he became a ghost. So that's all three books right there in one story. And just every, like I said with the guys, the Haynes from Auburn, I keep seeing these stories where there's just strange coincidences where the world obviously is not working in the way that people tend to think it is, where we have just a causal this then that type of scenario. Everything's just interconnected in a big web, it seems like, and everything is just connected. You have witchcraft, UFOs, ghosts, demons, just all kinds of weird things, and they're all happening together. They all the stories intertwine and interlink in ways that really stretch the imagination, even for somebody that's going into it with years of experience in the paranormal. It's just, I'm always surprised by how things connect.
Absolutely. No, it's interesting because depending on what camp you fall into, and I hope this doesn't get long winded, and it's not my intention. For people who don't pay attention to the things we're into, our research and investigations, and interviews that you do, perhaps they think that these kind of things don't affect them in their life, but I think they kind of do, unknowingly. I think for people on our side of the tracks where we see this happening, for me, there's a certain level of paranoia. And I don't know about you because I'm always thinking, well, was that intentional or unintentional? You really got to do the investigating to make sure, is it paranormal? Is it not paranormal? Um, where am I getting to this? I really don't know, but I think that I can only speak for myself. But sometimes I'm a little more paranoid now as the years go by. The more and more I dive into these stories and learn more about them. What about you? Because I know you're very intuitive. You know what's going on, but I know that you just answered the question earlier. But is there a certain extra elevated paranoia for you?
I wouldn't say paranoia, just an awareness of the fact that there's just so much more going on that we're not aware of. We're kind of taught to live in this bubble of physical mundane reality of cause and effect and politics and jobs and money, and it's not real. It's all just a skin over top of this crazy phenomena of spiritual reality that's underlying everything. And I wouldn't say paranoia, I would say more just being overwhelmed sometimes with the reality of things being so different, so drastically different from just when you open your eyes and look at the world. And well, nowadays with the things in the news, you see, I get paranoid about that kind of thing. because even though I might be spiritually inclined, people that are running the world are spiritually inclined in another way, and maybe are trying to do things that aren't so great for the normal people. So that's the kind of thing that I get paranoid about.
Sure, and that's fair. I think we all kind of get into that the more and more we watch. And sometimes I just want to turn it all off and just relax for a little while. And one of the last questions I'm going to ask you, because when people finish reading Strange Stories from the Skulking Stream, and especially the third one, The Stream of Spirits, what is the one thing you hope that they take away about history in their own backyard? Is it fear or a deeper respect for the people who lived and died in these valleys?
I started writing the book just wanting to get these spooky stories out there. You know, I see scary stories of this and that county books, and I kind of started off as writing spooky stories, you know, sharing kind of the folklore. And the more you get into it, the more you realize that these are all just people having weird experiences that they themselves can't really understand. And no matter where you live, like my books are focused on Eastern Pennsylvania, but I also talk about how these stories are local phenomena of more universal things that do happen everywhere. And I talk about other stories from outside the area just to bring in the themes of it. So, like you said, yeah, I do think definitely it's the people that have lived throughout history. History is an interesting thing, even if it's not just the people that are going through weird things and seeing ghosts and goblins and things. It's just interesting. And I go to history fairs and talk to people, and sometimes they'll have an interesting story to share for me, and I have interesting stories to share for them. And it's just community and learning about the history of the place where you live, learning about the history of other people, and realizing we're all kind of the same. We're all trying to deal with things. We're all experiencing things that we don't understand, and it's just life.
True story, brother. You couldn't have said it any better than that. And now, for our friends and listeners of Let's Find Out, they want to learn more about you, your books. Where can they get themselves a copy? Where can they go find out?
You can just look up my name. Just Google Richard Bigg. That's with 2 G's. Go to richardbigg.com. My books are on there. They're on Amazon. They're on Books A Million. You just search them. If you go to my website, that's probably the easiest way, richardbigg.com.
Awesome. And so we talked earlier before we started that you did a few little things. Look at me. What am I talking about? You went to see, now I'm getting inappropriate here. I don't mean to. So you did a few things this year. Where are you going to be at around April, May, June, and July? Because I know you got some things planned.
Probably going to do a book signing event at the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookstore. I do that every year. In September, I have the Powwow Festival at the Schuylkill County Historical Society. That'll be September 12th. I'm going to be at Albatwitch Day again in October 10th. That's at Wrightsville Riverfront Park in Wrightsville, PA. Right now, that's the big three. Probably do some more events here and there, some historical society events, things like that. Go to the website, you'll find it.
richardbigg.com. And now that I've had you here a few times already, I know you're working on something. I'm not going to spoil it. I know you got some things in the work. When that new book comes out, let's bring you back on the show, because I think that there's going to be more stories. And I'm looking forward to hearing them and looking forward to having you back on the show.
Yeah, weird things don't stop happening, so I'll keep writing about them.
Thank you, my friend.
Copyright Diego the Podcaster. All content for Let's Find Out is the property of Diego the Podcaster and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, Diego the Podcaster, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out with Diego is provided on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.